Chosen ones, hear this message carefully. This is not a coincidence. This is not random. If you are listening to these words right now, it is because God has intentionally guided you here. Heaven has marked this moment, and the urgency behind this message cannot be ignored any longer. God is calling you, not tomorrow, not someday in the future, but now. What you do after hearing this will determine the direction of the season ahead of you. Chosen ones, God is speaking because time is shifting. The spiritual atmosphere around you is changing rapidly. What once felt delayed is now accelerating. What once felt confusing is now being clarified. God is saying that this moment carries weight. This moment carries consequence. And this moment carries divine instruction. You are not allowed to remain passive anymore. Heaven is asking for your obedience, your courage, and your immediate response. For a long time, God has been preparing you quietly. While others were being celebrated publicly, you were being refined privately. While others were moving quickly, you were being slowed down intentionally. You questioned why things were taking so long. You wondered why doors kept closing. You even asked God if He had forgotten you. But God says, I was never late. I was making you ready. Everything you endured was necessary for what is now about to unfold. Chosen ones, this is important to God because you are standing at a spiritual intersection. One path leads to comfort, familiarity, and delay. The other path leads to obedience, sacrifice, and fulfillment of purpose. God is saying you cannot stand in the middle anymore. Indecision is no longer an option. Heaven is watching your next move. God says there are assignments attached to your obedience that will not activate until you move. You have been praying for clarity, but God says clarity will come after action, not before. Faith is required in this season, not feelings. Trust is required, not full understanding. God is saying, walk first and I will reveal the next step. Chosen ones, understand this clearly. The enemy is nervous right now. The resistance you've been feeling, the sudden distractions, the emotional exhaustion, the doubts creeping into your mind, these are not accidents. They are signs that you are close, very close. The enemy would not be fighting you this hard if what God placed inside you wasn't dangerous to darkness. God says you must act now because delay is becoming disobedience. You already know what God has been telling you to release. You already know what He has been asking you to stop tolerating. You already know which door He's been asking you to walk through. God is saying you have prayed enough about it. You have asked enough people about it. Now it is time to move. Chosen ones, obedience in this season will cost you comfort. It may cost you relationships. It may cost you approval. But disobedience will cost you destiny. God is not asking you to be perfect. He is asking you to be willing. He is not asking you to have everything figured out. He is asking you to trust Him enough to take the first step. God says there is a divine window open right now. This window will not remain open forever. This is a kairos moment, a God-appointed time. If you hesitate too long, you may have to wait another season to access what is available now. God does not want you to miss what He has prepared simply because you were afraid to move. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because people are connected to your obedience. There are lives that will be impacted when you say yes. There are chains that will break when you move forward. There are prayers that will be answered through your obedience. What God placed inside you was never just for you. God says you have outgrown the place you are standing in. That environment no longer matches who you are becoming. That mindset no longer aligns with your calling. That season has already expired. Staying there will only create frustration, but obedience will create flow. Chosen ones, act now by surrendering fully. Act now by letting go of fear. Act now by trusting God even when it feels uncomfortable. Act now by choosing obedience over delay. Heaven is backing you. Angels are assigned to your movement. God's grace is sufficient for every step you are about to take. God says, I am with you. I will not fail you. I will not abandon you. If you move, I will move. If you trust me, I will cover you. If you obey me, I will elevate you. Chosen ones, do not ignore this message. Do not scroll past this moment spiritually. This is your confirmation. This is your instruction. This is your call to action. What God is asking of you right now is very much important to Him because you are important to Him. Chosen ones, continue listening closely because what God is revealing now goes deeper than before. This is not just encouragement, this is instruction. This is not just motivation, this is alignment. God is saying that the reason this message feels heavy is because it carries authority. Heaven is not whispering anymore. Heaven is speaking clearly, firmly, and urgently. Chosen ones, God says many of you have been feeling an inner restlessness you couldn't explain. You tried to distract yourself. You tried to stay busy. You tried to silence it with entertainment, sleep, or conversations, but it kept returning. That restlessness is not anxiety. It is not confusion. It is activation. It is the stirring of purpose that can no longer remain dormant. God says you have been sitting on answers while still asking questions. You have been holding keys while still praying for doors to open. Heaven is saying the delay is not on God's side anymore. The delay has been your hesitation to fully trust what God already told you in secret. Chosen ones understand this. God always speaks twice, once to confirm your calling and once to demand your obedience. This message is the second time. The first time He spoke gently. He nudged you. He planted the idea. He allowed circumstances to repeat themselves so you could notice the pattern. But now God is saying, I need your yes without negotiation. Many of you have been trying to obey God while still holding on to backup plans. You said, God, I trust you, but just in case. And God says this season does not allow backups. This assignment requires full surrender. Partial obedience will produce partial results, and God did not design your destiny to be lived halfway. Chosen ones, God is saying the reason the pressure has increased is because your capacity has increased. What used to overwhelm you no longer does. What used to break you now strengthens you. You are no longer who you were in the last season, but you keep measuring yourself by old limitations. God says, stop underestimating what I have already built inside you. This is very important to God because He has invested time into you. He has protected you when you didn't even know danger was near. He redirected paths that would have destroyed you. He removed people who would have delayed your destiny. Even when you felt rejected, you were being rescued. Even when doors slammed, you were being spared. Chosen ones, God says there are spiritual contracts breaking right now. Generational patterns are ending with you. Cycles of delay, poverty, fear, silence, and compromise are being dismantled because you decided to listen. But now comes the part where you must act. Freedom must be maintained through obedience. God says the enemy has been trying to convince you that obedience will cost you too much. But heaven says disobedience will cost you far more. Every time you delayed, peace decreased. Every time you ignored the instruction, frustration increased. That was not punishment, that was conviction. Chosen ones, God is saying you are not late. You are right on time, but only if you move now. The grace covering this season is specific. It will not carry over into indefinite delay. There are blessings that are time-sensitive. There are connections that will only align when you move in faith. God says some of you are waiting for confidence, but confidence comes after obedience, not before. You are waiting to feel ready, but readiness is built while walking, not while standing still. Faith is proven in motion. Chosen ones, hear this carefully. God is not asking you to explain yourself to everyone. Silence is also obedience. There are moves God will tell you to make that He will not explain to others. Stop trying to gain approval from people who are not assigned to your future. God says the reason certain people don't understand you anymore is because your language has changed spiritually. Your hunger has changed. Your tolerance has changed. You are not arrogant, you are aligned. And alignment always looks offensive to those who benefit from your old version. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because He sees what is coming next. He sees the weight you will carry. He sees the responsibility attached to your calling. And he is saying you must act now so you are positioned correctly when the shift happens. There is a sudden acceleration coming. What felt stuck for years will begin moving rapidly. But acceleration without alignment causes collapse. That is why God is correcting you now. That is why He is pruning now. That is why He is demanding obedience now. God says stop romanticizing past seasons. They were necessary, but they are finished. You cannot carry old habits into new dimensions. You cannot bring fear into places where authority is required. You cannot remain silent when God has anointed your voice. Chosen ones, God says you were not chosen because you were perfect. You were chosen because you were willing to be corrected, willing to be refined, willing to stand alone if necessary, willing to obey even when misunderstood. This is very important to God because your obedience is connected to other people's breakthrough. When you delay, someone else remains bound. When you hesitate, someone else remains confused. Your yes is bigger than you think. God says many of you have been experiencing spiritual warfare in your dreams, in your thoughts, and in your emotions. That is because the enemy knows time is running out. He knows once you step fully into obedience, access will be revoked. Chosen ones, God is calling you out of survival mode. You are no longer meant to just get by. You are meant to build, lead, create, speak, and establish. But survival thinking will sabotage kingdom assignment. God says act now by changing how you speak about yourself. Act now by cutting off distractions that drain your spirit. Act now by prioritizing prayer over panic. Act now by choosing discipline over comfort. Heaven is not asking for perfection. Heaven is asking for movement. Chosen ones, God says this is the season where excuses expire. You have learned enough. You have healed enough. You have waited enough. Now it is time to execute what God has already shown you. God says do not despise small beginnings. The first step may feel unimpressive, but it is powerful in the spirit. Obedience releases momentum. Chosen ones, some of you are being called to speak. Some are being called to create. Some are being called to leave. Some are being called to stay but with a new mindset. Whatever God told you privately, do that. Stop asking God to confirm what He already confirmed. This message is your confirmation. God says fear will try to rise when you move, but fear is not a sign to stop. It is a sign you are crossing a boundary. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is obedience in spite of it. Chosen ones, this is important to God because He trusts you. Yes, He trusts you. He would not assign this to you if you were incapable. He would not call you if you were unqualified. He qualifies those He calls. Act now because heaven is waiting on earth's response. Act now because angels are already assigned. Act now because what you have been praying for is tied to what God is asking from you. Chosen ones, this is not the time to retreat. This is the time to rise. This is not the time to shrink. This is the time to stand firm. This is not the time to doubt. This is the time to obey. God says, if you take one step toward me, I will take 10 toward you. If you trust me with the unknown, I will secure the outcome. Do not ignore this stirring. Do not delay this instruction. Do not silence this conviction. This is very much important to God, because your obedience unlocks destiny, alignment, and divine acceleration. Act now. Chosen ones, continue to stay attentive because God is still speaking. What you are hearing now is not repetition, it is reinforcement. Heaven repeats what is critical, not what is casual. God knows how easily the human heart becomes distracted, fearful, or delayed, and that is why He is emphasizing this message again and again. This moment is too important to miss. Chosen ones, God says many of you have been standing at the edge of transition without realizing it. You sensed that something was ending, but you didn't know what was beginning. You felt the discomfort, but you couldn't identify the direction. That is because transitions are rarely announced loudly. They begin quietly, internally, and spiritually before they ever become visible externally. God says this is why things no longer feel the same. Conversations that once excited you now feel empty. Places you once enjoyed now feel heavy. Goals that once motivated you now feel incomplete. This is not ingratitude, this is growth. You are outgrowing what once fit you. Chosen ones, this is important to God because He does not want you to remain in environments that restrict what He is developing inside you. Staying too long in the wrong place can slowly suffocate purpose. God loves you enough to make you uncomfortable when it's time to move. God says many of you have been interpreting resistance as a sign to stop, but heaven says resistance is proof that you are moving in the right direction. If you were still going nowhere, there would be no opposition. Darkness only fights what threatens it. Chosen ones, God is saying that your obedience now will save you years of unnecessary struggle later. Some delays are merciful, but others are costly. This season is about preventing future regret. God sees roads you cannot see. He knows what will happen if you stay where you are too long. That is why He is urging you to act now. God says some of you are afraid because obedience requires letting go of control. You like knowing the plan. You like certainty. You like guarantees. But God says faith does not work with guarantees, it works with trust. Trust requires surrender, and surrender requires humility. Chosen ones, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is agreeing with what God says about you, even when your emotions disagree. God says you are ready, even if you don't feel ready. You are equipped, even if you feel unsure. You are capable, even if fear tries to convince you otherwise. This message is important to God because He has been shaping your character for this moment. The patience you learned, the endurance you developed, the discernment you gained, all of it was preparation. Nothing was wasted. No tear was ignored. No season was meaningless. Chosen ones, God says stop revisiting what He already delivered you from. Stop reopening doors He already closed. Stop doubting decisions He already confirmed. The past has no authority over your future unless you give it permission. God says there are divine alignments waiting for you, but they will not meet you where you are. They will meet you where God is calling you to go. Some connections only activate after obedience. Some doors only open once you move. Chosen ones, this is why God keeps saying now. Not because He wants to pressure you, but because timing matters. Heaven operates on divine timing, not human comfort. Missed timing often feels like confusion, delay, or unnecessary struggle. God says many of you have been asking, why now? And heaven answers, because you are ready now. You have learned what you needed to learn. You have healed what needed healing. You have matured enough to handle what is coming. Chosen ones, God is saying that obedience will stretch you, but it will not break you. Fear will speak loudly, but it will not win unless you listen to it. Doubt will try to negotiate, but obedience requires a firm yes. God says stop expecting everyone to celebrate your obedience. Some people will misunderstand you. Some will criticize you. Some will distance themselves. That does not mean you are wrong. It means you are no longer available for what they needed you to be. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because compromise is subtle. It doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like delay. Sometimes it looks like overthinking. Sometimes it looks like waiting for the perfect moment. But God says delayed obedience is still disobedience. God says you have been asking Him to remove fear, but fear leaves when obedience begins. Courage is released through action. Peace follows alignment. Chosen ones, God says your prayers are shifting. You are no longer praying small prayers. You are no longer asking only for survival. You are asking for purpose, clarity, and impact. God says those prayers require a deeper level of obedience. God is not calling you into chaos. He is calling you into order. Divine order may feel disruptive at first because it rearranges priorities, relationships, and routines. But once alignment settles, peace follows. Chosen ones, this is important to God because He sees the ripple effect of your obedience. One decision will impact multiple lives. One step will create multiple opportunities. One yes will unlock multiple doors. God says do not underestimate the power of consistency. You don't need to do everything at once. You just need to do what God told you to do today. Daily obedience creates lasting transformation. Chosen ones, God says some of you are being asked to speak truth where you once stayed silent. Silence protected you in past seasons, but now it limits you. Your voice carries authority because it carries truth. God says others of you are being asked to walk away quietly, without explanation. Not every exit requires a speech. Some departures are meant to be peaceful, not dramatic. Chosen ones, this is important to God because He is preparing you for increase. Increase requires integrity. Increase requires discipline. Increase requires obedience. God will not elevate what He cannot trust. God says the reason He is calling you now is because the next level demands a higher level of surrender. What got you here will not take you there. Chosen ones, stop comparing your journey to others. Their timing is not your timing. Their assignment is not your assignment. God deals with you personally because your purpose is personal. God says act now by choosing faith over familiarity. Act now by choosing obedience over comfort. Act now by choosing purpose over fear. Heaven says you are supported. You are guided. You are not walking alone. Even when you feel unsure, God is directing your steps. Chosen ones, God says this is not a season of retreat. It is a season of advancement. You are not losing anything of value. You are gaining alignment. God says remember this. Obedience does not mean you won't feel fear. It means fear will not control you. Chosen ones, the moment you move, momentum will follow. The moment you obey, clarity will increase. The moment you trust, peace will return. This is why this message is very much important to God. He is not trying to rush you. He is trying to position you. Do not ignore this call. Do not delay this instruction. Do not silence this conviction. Chosen ones, stay present, because God is still unfolding this message layer by layer. What you are hearing now is not meant to rush you, but it is meant to awaken you. Heaven is patient, but purpose is precise. God is not repeating Himself because you didn't hear Him. He is repeating Himself because what He is saying carries eternal weight. Chosen ones, God says many of you are standing between who you were and who you are becoming. This space feels uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar. You cannot return to who you used to be, and you have not fully stepped into who you are called to be. This in-between place is where faith is tested the most. God says you have been feeling a strange combination of exhaustion and anticipation. You are tired of waiting, yet you sense something is close. That tension is not confusion, it is transition. Transitions always stretch the soul before they expand the destiny. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because He sees how close you are to breaking through patterns that have followed you for years. Patterns of delay, patterns of self-doubt, patterns of shrinking yourself to keep others comfortable. God says those patterns end with this decision. God is saying that the reason you feel exposed right now is because hiding is no longer allowed. What He placed inside you requires visibility. You were never meant to remain hidden forever. Hidden seasons protect you, but revealed seasons fulfill you. Chosen ones, God says stop asking why the pressure increased when you decided to obey. Pressure reveals what is inside you. Pressure produces clarity. Pressure forces decision. You were strong enough to carry it, that is why it came. God says you have been praying for elevation, but elevation requires separation. Not everyone can go where God is taking you. Some people were assigned to a season, not a lifetime. Letting go does not mean you failed. It means the assignment is complete. Chosen ones, this is important to God because He knows how deeply you care. You try to be understanding. You try to be patient. You try to include everyone. But God says discernment must now lead compassion. You cannot sacrifice obedience to preserve comfort. God says you are not abandoning anyone by obeying Him. He will take care of what you leave behind. Your responsibility is alignment, not outcome. Chosen ones, many of you have been waiting for a sign that you are on the right path. God says the resistance is the sign. The pruning is the sign. The inner urgency is the sign. Peace does not always come before obedience. It often comes after. God says stop thinking obedience will remove all uncertainty. Faith does not erase uncertainty. It gives you strength to walk through it. Trusting God does not mean you understand everything. It means you trust who is leading you. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because you have been too hard on yourself. You judge your progress by speed instead of growth. God says, look again, you are not who you were. Your reactions changed. Your discernment sharpened. Your boundaries strengthened. That is progress. God says do not minimize how far you have come just because you are not where you want to be yet. Forward is still forward. Chosen ones, God is saying the reason some prayers feel unanswered is because the answer is attached to movement. You are asking God to bless what He already told you to build. Heaven responds to obedience, not just desire. God says this is not the time to negotiate with fear. Fear will always ask for delay. Fear will always demand proof. But faith requires trust without guarantees. Chosen ones understand this. Obedience does not always feel spiritual. Sometimes it feels practical. Sometimes it feels boring. Sometimes it feels lonely. But heaven measures obedience, not emotion. God says you have been waiting for permission from people who were never assigned to approve you. The only permission you need is heaven's, and you already have it. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because He is preparing you for responsibility. Responsibility requires maturity. Maturity requires obedience. God will not release influence where integrity is still being tested. God says some of you are being asked to slow down, while others are being asked to speed up. Obedience is not one size fits all. What matters is that you follow what God told you, not what He told someone else. Chosen ones, stop comparing your obedience to someone else's calling. Comparison creates confusion. Obedience creates clarity. God says your current discomfort is not punishment, it is positioning. He is shifting your posture so you can carry what is coming without breaking. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because your obedience will require consistency, not just courage. Anyone can obey once. Destiny requires daily yes. God says act now by adjusting your priorities. What you feed grows. What you ignore weakens. Feed your spirit more than your fear. Chosen ones, God says you have been asking for confirmation, but confirmation often comes after commitment. Once you step out, provision will appear. Once you move, clarity will follow. God says the enemy has been whispering that it's safer to stay where you are. But safety without purpose becomes a prison. You were not created to be comfortable. You were created to be aligned. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because He sees the influence you will carry. Influence requires humility. Humility requires obedience. God trusts you with weight because you learned how to kneel. God says your silence in past seasons trained you to listen. Now your obedience will train you to lead. Chosen ones, some of you are afraid of disappointing people. God says obeying Him may disappoint people, but disobeying Him will disappoint your spirit. God says do not confuse loyalty with bondage. Loyalty to God must come first. Everything else must fall in line. Chosen ones, this is important to God because He has already gone ahead of you. What you fear, He has already faced. What you worry about, He has already handled. You are not stepping into the unknown alone. God says act now by trusting His character when you cannot trace His plan. He has never failed you, and He will not start now. Chosen ones, God is saying this season will require discipline over desire. Desire fluctuates. Discipline sustains. Destiny is built on discipline. God says the reason distractions increased is because focus is required. The enemy attacks focus before assignment. Guard your attention. Chosen ones, this message is important to God because your obedience will shift atmospheres. Rooms will feel different when you enter. Conversations will change. Darkness will retreat, not because of who you are, but because of who you obey. God says some of you will have to obey quietly. No announcement, no applause. Heaven sees what people do not. Chosen ones, stop waiting for everything to make sense. Faith does not demand explanation, it demands obedience. God says this is the hour where excuses lose their power. You are no longer unaware. You are no longer unprepared. You are no longer overlooked. Chosen ones, God says the next level will not respond to hesitation. It responds to faith. Act now not because you feel fearless, but because you trust God more than your fear. Act now not because the road is clear, but because the one leading you is faithful. Act now because heaven has already moved. This message is very much important to God, because your obedience is the bridge between promise and fulfillment.